Independence arrived with flags, anthems, and celebrations. Crowds gathered, colonial administrators lowered their banners, new leaders stood before microphones promising a different future, and for a moment, it felt like history had turned a page, like something broken had been repaired, like sovereignty had finally returned home. But beneath the ceremonies, something complicated remained, because political independence is visible. It is dramatic, it is emotional, but control is quieter. Control hides in systems, in contracts, in supply chains, in currencies, in education, in habits of thought. And while Africa gained independence, many of the structures that shaped dependency remained in place, because colonization did not simply occupy land, it reorganized economies, it redirected production, it redefined value. And when European powers departed, they left behind borders they had drawn, infrastructures they had designed, and markets they still influenced. And the new African nations inherited states built for extraction, not integration, railways leading from mines to ports instead of cities to cities, agricultural patterns built for export instead of local security, bureaucracies fluent in foreign administration but distant from village life, and leaders stepped into offices filled with responsibility but limited tools, because independence did not reset the global system, it transferred participation within it. And immediately choices became constrained. How do you fund development when your economy depends on exporting raw materials, whose prices are determined elsewhere? How do you build industry when manufacturing infrastructure was never cultivated? How do you unify populations separated by artificial borders? How do you replace languages that have become administrative necessities? And every answer carried trade-off. Because freedom without resources is negotiation. And negotiation within unequal systems is compromise. And so some leaders sought rapid modernization. Others turned towards socialism. Others balanced between global powers. But the pressures were enormous. Debt emerged as a new form of influence. Loans offered for development came with conditions. Policy adjustments shaped by foreign institutions. Priorities defined by lenders. And slowly decision-making moved outward again. Not through governance but through economics, and the global market rewarded certain behaviors, punished others, encouraging export dependence, discouraging protection of infant industries. And whenever resistance appeared, capital could retreat, creating crisis, and crisis demanded cooperation. And cooperation often meant alignment with external expectations. And inside nations, political challenges multiplied because independence had raised hope. People expected immediate transformation: schools, hospitals, roads, employment, dignity. And when change moved slowly, frustration grew, sometimes redirected toward leaders, sometimes manipulated by outside interests. Coups occurred, instability followed, narratives formed that Africa was incapable of governance, ignoring the structural weight placed upon new states barely years old. And yet, despite difficulty, remarkable efforts unfolded. Universities expanded, cultural movements revived identity, regional organizations attempted cooperation, thinkers debated models of development grounded in African realities, but global dynamics remained powerful. Cold War politics turned African territories into arenas of competition. Support offered not for sovereignty but for allegiance, and development intertwined with geopolitics. And by the end of the 20th century, many nations had achieved formal independence for decades. Yet patterns of trade looked familiar: raw materials outward, finished goods inward, currencies vulnerable, industries fragile. But understanding this is only the beginning. And observers asked why, as if history had begun at independence, forgetting the centuries that had shaped the starting line. And this is where misunderstanding deepens. Because freedom is not a moment, it is a process. And processes require time, stability, memory, and control over narrative. And narrative still often lives elsewhere. Africa describes more than it describes itself. evaluate it through metrics developed for other histories, compared without context, and yet inside the continent life continues, innovation continues, informal economies adapt, entrepreneurs build despite constraint, artists reshape identity, technology creates new connections, and younger generations ask different questions. Not only what was taken, but what can be built. Not only how did we arrive here, but how do we move forward? And this shift matters because independence that begins politically must eventually become intellectual, economic, psychological, reclaiming confidence in capacity, in heritage, in creativity, and perhaps the most powerful realization emerging now is this, that inherited systems can be redesigned, trade relationships renegotiated, education reoriented, integration deepened across borders. Because those borders, however artificial, now hold shared futures, and the conversation about independence evolves from complaint to construction, from memory of loss to imagination of possibility. And the world watches again, sometimes skeptical, sometimes supportive, often surprised, because expectations formed during domination are difficult to release. But Africa is not static. It never has been, and understanding why freedom did not immediately become control does not diminish independence. It clarifies the work remaining, because sovereignty is layered: political, economic, cultural, intellectual, and each layer requires different strategies, patience, unity, courage, and above all, narrative reclamation, the ability to define reality from within rather than accept definition from outside. And once that begins, independence matures, it deepens, it stabilizes, it grows roots, and perhaps that is where Africa stands now. Not at the end of struggle, not at the beginning, but in the complex middle, aware of history, aware of interruption, aware of survival, and increasingly aware of potential. And potential is powerful because it invites action, invites responsibility, invites vision. And the same continent that once built empires, knowledge systems, trade networks, spiritual philosophies still carries that inheritance, not as nostalgia, but as resource. And the question is no longer whether Africa is free, but how freedom will be shaped, by whom, for whom, and toward what future. And answering that may be the next chapter history has been waiting for.